Hello, everyone, and happy Climate Week. The Dairy Alliance is so excited to have you all here in beautiful Deering, Georgia at Hillcrest Farms. The Rogers family is one of the 97% of dairy farms in the United States that are family owned and operated, and we're so excited for Mark Rogers to show us around. Mark is a third generation farmer, and along with his family has been dairy farming since 1941 at Hillcrest. Hillcrest holds the title as the first farm in Georgia to operate a robotic dairy, which we'll hear more about today. My name is Mackenzie Panhans, and I'm the Director of Sustainability and Farmer Communications at the Dairy Alliance. I work on behalf of the over 1,100 dairy farm families across the Southeast to help people understand dairy farmers' commitment to environmental stewardship and how dairy foods can fit into a sustainable diet. Joining me is my wonderful co-host, Callie Yakubishin, who will introduce herself.
Hi everyone, happy Climate Week. My name is Callie Yakubishin and I am a registered dietitian and I help lead our community wellness team at the Dairy Alliance. My work revolves around educating health professionals and consumers about all things dairy nutrition. But we know nutrition and health are not the only things that affect food choice. Rather, people also want foods that are affordable, safe, culturally acceptable, and with a low impact on the environment. Our intention today is to help shine some light on how dairy foods and our dairy farmers are meeting these demands and providing sustainable food choices.
Thanks, Callie. We're joining Mark Rogers today at Hillcrest Farms to learn about his farm and hear about a recent environmental assessment they completed to calculate their farm's carbon footprint. This assessment was part of the U.S. Dairy Net Zero Initiative, or NZI project, which modeled the greenhouse gas footprint of four small to mid-sized commercial dairies in the U.S., highlighting their achievements and pathways to greenhouse gas neutrality. Researchers utilized the FARM, Environmental Stewardship, or FARM-ES, and USDA COMET computer models to quantify the greenhouse gas footprints of each of these participating farms. Today, you'll hear from Mark Rogers about what makes his dairy farm unique, and you can see a couple of those practices outlined here on your screen, and how dairy farmers across the country strive to reduce their environmental impact and prioritize cow care. These practices collectively had led to Hillcrest Farms being carbon neutral.
Before we get started, we want you to know that we love questions. And let me tell you, we got great questions that came in on the registration. So already we're off to a great start. Please submit any questions that you have. If you're joining on Zoom, do that via the Q&A box. And then if you happen to be joining on Facebook, you can just leave your question as a comment and we'll get that question. And don't be shy. The reason we're here today is to answer those questions. So we have a diverse audience, so there's some topics that are really familiar to others, some that not so much. So please question away.
All right, without further ado, let's introduce you to the reason we are all here. Mark, can you share a little bit of background on yourself and Hillcrest Farms?
Properties one, and we farm about 850 acres total. We're milking about 320 cows, but the facility here has close to 400 head in it with milking dry and close up to calving cows, which we call our maternity group. The business was actually started by a lady, my grandmother. So she had excess milk, started selling it, did pretty well with dairy, and eventually my grandfather came home. Then my father got in the business, and now me and my brother, and now our Gen 4s, Caitlin and Josh, are here helping on the farm. And so it's a family affair. And we've got about 8 more employees that work with us. Some are part-time, some are full-time. But it's a really great group and a lot of young people in the group. So that's pretty dynamic here at Hillcrest. But we're glad you joined us today.
Awesome. And Mark, I see your environmental assessment graphic right there behind you. Can you tell us a little bit about the assessment, what it was, and maybe a little bit of what you learned from it?
Yeah, I mean, we were pretty excited to partner with the Dairy Alliance and others to just see what our carbon footprint is. We hear all these terms, carbon footprint, greenhouse gases, and wanted to see what impact we had here at Hillcrest. And we actually were real pleased with the results with the combination of our farm, our riparian areas, which are areas that we keep green trees on, mainly pine trees here in the South, but some hardwoods to protect our streams and water around. And there's creeks that completely surround our farm. So it's a good bit of timber there. and the fact that we can grow 3 crops a year on the same piece of property and have it in crops pretty well 365 days a year. That led us to be carbon neutral, and we're actually sequestering carbon most of the year. So real good information to have. Something we may can market in the future we're looking at, but it's a combination of a lot of little things that allow us to be carbon neutral and good for the environment.
Great. One of the questions that came in, Mark, prior to the tour, and I get this question a lot, what are the practices you follow to combine as much sustainable ag as possible while remaining profitable? So essentially, are you sacrificing profitability on your farm to be sustainable, or do they kind of go hand in hand?
I think they go hand in hand. No matter how you feel about climate change and different things, we use about a third less electricity and fuel than a normal farm. And we were actually surprised with some of the numbers, this 20 to 30% that we're using less of, especially with all the fans we run to keep cows cool. The numbers were pretty impressive. And so anytime we use less fuel, less electricity, it helps with my bottom line and keeps us in business.
Yeah.
So for those in the audience who might not be as familiar with environmental terms, maybe you could share the significance of greenhouse gases, Mackenzie?
Yeah, so this is a very complex topic, but in the most basic sense, greenhouse gas emissions are just one of the ways we can measure environmental impact of an industry or a specific farm. Greenhouse gases trap the sun's heat and they hold it, basically serving as a warm blanket around the planet, and in turn contributes to climate change. Just to level set a little bit, in the United States, we do rely on the EPA to supply us with greenhouse gas data. And based on their 2022 report, agriculture contributed 10% of all US greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if you compare that to 28% for transportation, 27% for electricity, 22% for industry, and 12% for residential and commercial. And then in addition to that, US dairies greenhouse gas footprint is less than 2% of that nation's total. It's also important to note that this is US data, right? So sometimes you'll see global numbers, which are a bit bigger for the ag sector as well as the dairy sector. But because of our efficiencies within the United States, that 2%, less than 2%, is a number of US dairies greenhouse gas emissions. Mark, so we've heard Hillcrest Farms was the first robotic dairy in the state of Georgia. Why don't we go ahead and head into the observation room and we'll see if we can catch a glimpse of what that technology looks like. While you're headed that way, Mark, could you tell us a little bit more what it means to have a voluntary milking system?
Sure. Our particular robots are dealer valve robots, and it's a dealer valve VMS. And the important thing there is the VMS, a voluntary milking system. So the robots right now, there's 2 on this side of the barn. We have 3 with the mature cows on the other side. It's attaching milkers, and it does all this with some really cool technology. So a lot of this is precision ag. It goes all the way from, it starts with a little button in the cow's ear. It's a radio frequency identifier. So it identifies the cow. It knows who is standing there. And anyway, if she has permission, she comes in, it will milk the cow.
And typically, Mark, how long does it take from start to finish to milk one cow?
Oh, that's pretty cool. I think today was about 6 minutes and 24 seconds. I got a dashboard in my office that shows us how much milk they're giving. And the average cow here at Hillcrest, she averages about 11 gallons a day, which is in the top tier of the country on a production per cow basis. And so, but the higher producing cows can actually visit the robot because it's voluntary more often. They can go 5, maybe even 6 times a day occasionally. And we've had a cow milk over 200 pounds in one day. So occasionally we see some really, really impressive numbers, but it's voluntary. And the cow comes in there mainly because the pressure of the milk, the weight of the milk, but she gets a treat while she's in the robot. And the robot's monitoring and looking at a lot of cool precision ag stuff. Where in a traditional dairy, we would actually hand squirt some milk on the floor and look at it. The robot's got a spectrometer. It's looking at the milk. It's making sure the color is absolutely white. If anything is wrong, this robot will take the milk, dump it down the drain, and wash itself before it ever milks another cow, which is just a great point of safety with robots. It also measures the milk on each individual quarter under the cow. And if anything is not up to normal, it will tell us, hey, this cow's not producing like she was. It even looks at the conductivity of the milk, and it looks at how far. Basically, the cow has a smartwatch on her neck, and it's an accelerometer, but it tells you how much she moves during that given day. So she moves less than she normally moves, and perhaps she gave less milk. It'll alert us on our phones, on the computers, and say, hey, you need to go look at it.
So, Mark, we're getting a couple questions about because it's voluntary, meaning the cows can just go in when they want to. Do they have to be trained to do this? And then we got another question: how do you train first calf heifers to do this? So, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, mainly it's my daughter Caitlin and her staff, which primarily two young ladies that work with her, her herdsman and her calf manager. They'll help her. They'll actually take the cow, and sometimes it takes as little as 1 day to train a cow. Some days, times it may take a couple of weeks. You know, she's just a slower learner. But they actually put them in what they call a fetch pen, which goes into robot number 2 over here because she's a new cow. She just had her first calf, and so they're going to take her in. And actually, the first milking, they cut the mechanical arm off that can see and attach the milkers, and they manually do it. So she has a pleasant experience with no noise, and she's getting a treat while she's in there. So if she's a little fidgety, we may even scratch her on the back or something to just keep her really calm while they do that first milking. And then after that, she comes in, she figures out that treat is given to her at really slowly. And so after that, she just comes back for the treat, and she realizes that she has less pressure after she milks.
And Mark, what have you guys seen with the adoption of installing these robots? What your daily operation changes have been, right? Do you guys have more freedom? Obviously, you're managing more data, really, at this point. Tell us a little bit about what differences that looks like.
I think one of the most interesting things right off the cuff was our staff change. We went to a younger staff, a more tech savvy staff. We also went to a staff that was more female. We had about 80% male, 20% female prior to robots. Now it's about 50-50. And these young ladies have a more versatile schedule. So they can go home. And of course, somebody's always on call, but they'll come back at night with their pajamas and a pair of Crocs on and reattach a cup or something if something breaks in there. And they're always monitoring things with their phones. And they're always toting a phone anyway. So they kind of like the freedom. Instead of doing the mundane process of actually attaching milkers and milking a herd of cows 2 or 3 times a day, now they're managing cows. They're taking better care of cows. They're looking at the cows. They're staying with the cows, and they learn to work on robots.
So after the milk leaves the robotic milker, it heads to the tank room. So we're going to head over to the tank room now. And it's important to remember that we'll talk about this here at this next stop, but that despite whether a dairy food product makes an antibiotic claim or not, no dairy food for consumption in the US can legally contain antibiotics. I think as an RD, as you look at food labels, this can be confusing because some labels say does not contain antibiotics and some don't. But whether it says that or not, no dairy food can have antibiotics that's sold in our grocery stores. So Mark, can you tell us how milk travels from the robot to the tank room and then what happens in this room?
Yeah. One thing we do when we do tour families here, we show them that the milk's coming out of that cow, and that cow's body temperature is higher than a human. So milk's coming out, the cow's 101.5 degrees is her average cow. And so we hold all the milk in a container there at the robot. And once it looks at it and goes, hey, this milk is great, it's perfect in every way, it's going to pump it toward one of our giant milk tanks in here. And these milk tanks hold over 96,000 glasses of milk in each tank. So 6,000 gallons. So it's going to run through what we call a plate cooler. And that plate cooler is actually going to chill the milk. And there we're running milk on one side of a plate. We're running water on the other side. And that well water is exchanging temperature. And in just about 2 minutes, we're going to take that milk from 100 degrees down to 37 degrees. And that's going to give mom, grandmom, whoever's purchasing the milk, the freshest, best quality milk they could possibly get. And so that milk's held in that tank. And usually about every 36 to 40 hours, there's going to be a truck come in and they'll offload our milk onto that truck. And from there, it's shipped to the plant that the co-op wants to send it to.
That's awesome. I think you've talked a lot about with the robots, kind of how you get that high quality milk. And then, in here too, in terms of keeping it cold, are you the only one that's managing the quality of the milk, or is there any sort of oversight with that?
Yeah, of course, when the truck driver comes in, they're going to pull some samples. Those samples travel with the milk to the plant. The plant will check the samples, and then they actually send the samples also to an independent lab to check, and they're going to check for the quality of the milk. The other thing they check here in the Southeast in particular, well, they check protein content of the milk, and they're going to check the butterfat content, because not only are we paid for the milk, but we're paid for the amount of butterfat in the milk. So it's important to us to keep really high quality milk and try to have a real high quality butterfat in there too.
That was something that I learned when I first started working in the dairy industry, was that, we know that whole milk is standardized at the processing plant, and that butter fat can vary from farm to farm. And that's a big thing that, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but that you are breeding for and looking at genetics in terms of how you're farming.
Right. The butterfat's controlled by what we feed primarily, has a huge impact. These very fibrous feeds increase the butter in the milk. And like I said, we want the maximum butter fat we can get. And our cows are usually averaging about a little over 4% fat. So it's a great product when it leaves here. And genetics do play a role in that too. So we're constantly breeding for cows that should have higher butter fat content.
Mm-hmm. And then we're going to move on to the next stop. Before we do, someone asked a question related here. They're saying, how does testing for the milk work? I think we talked about that with the samples, but they're also asking for cows that might be sick. Are they milked in a different area, and kind of what happens to those cows?
Yeah, if from the observations and indications, if that cow comes up and it shows that she needs to be isolated, we actually move the cow out of the herd. We actually move her to what we call rest and recovery, which is the old dairy facility. And there she goes in a special pen that we've got set aside for those cases. And we treat based on recommendations of our veterinarian, who happens to be my niece. But her, along with my daughter, who is the operating manager of the dairy farm, they make decisions. And first of all, they may run a lab sample here on farm to see if it's something that does need treating. If it's something that does not need treating, that the cow has already killed it on her own with her own body, then at that case, we won't treat. We'll just do supportive therapy till she can go back in herd. If on the recommendation of a veterinarian, she is treated, we will take that cow and isolate her over there for the required time before returning her to a robot.
Great. And then one last question, because I want to make sure this is clear. We got another one that came in, but someone said, I heard it said that antibiotics are not in milk. And then they're asking, did you mean always, or just for specific farms like this farm? And they're saying, it was my understanding that Just Organic is antibiotic free. And as an RD, I can share that the milk sold in the grocery store, none of that milk will ever contain antibiotics, thanks to all of the testing we're talking about. And Mark, do you have anything to add here?
No, I think you covered it right there.
Okay.
Every load of milk should be perfect when it leaves.
Okay, great. Okay, so as before we talk about the freestall here, I did want to just chime in and just say that before we head here, I wanted to share some tips for those with lactose intolerance, since accessibility and relevance to other cultures are factors that need to be considered when it comes to sustainable foods. So oftentimes there's a misconception that those with lactose intolerance cannot consume dairy. And if you look at this graphic, you can see that in fact, the opposite is true. There are many lactose-free and low lactose options available in the dairy aisle. And Hillcrest Farms does a great job of displaying, just in general, all the choices available in the dairy aisle. You can see on this fun artwork, that hopefully we can display here. Oh yeah, so they do a great job of sharing, of course, milk is the initial product, but everything you can make from milk that can be relevant to so many different dishes, recipes, cultures, and there's a lot of options out there for those to get in those great nutrients that dairy provides. So yeah, I'm going to toss it back to you, Mackenzie and Mark, to talk about the freestyle barn.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
our. You
Nope, go
ready
ahead,
for
Mark.
me?
Yeah, hit
Yeah,
it.
this is our freestyle barn, and the key word there is free stall. They're free to lay in whatever stall they want, and you can see the stalls are bedded with basically the same thing as beach sand. You may see the same type sand right up the road at that little golf course, the Augusta National, and where they play that famous Masters game. It's not but about 25 miles up the road, and so this sand is really comfortable. And if you think about it, if you've ever dropped down to your knees in your yard or in a sand dune at the beach, which one is more comfortable? By far the sand dune. So the same thing. These girls are huge. The average cow here weighs around 1,300 pounds, but to be such a big animal, they've got pretty small feet. So all that weight's carried on that, and you can see in here a product we upcycled is this rubber. It actually came out of New York State and Canada, and it was going to landfills, and they went back and grooved it to give it really good traction, and we repurposed it. So instead of going to a landfill, it's now underneath our cows. It is about $100,000 investment for our family to do this on every main cow alley through the barn, just to keep them a little bit more comfortable. And what we've seen is a lot better foot and leg on cows since we've done this. The other thing cool about this barn, it's 7 foot higher on this upper end than the lower end. There's 2 big water towers, and about every hour, one of these main lanes will flush. And when I say flush, it sends a 4-inch wave of water the entire length of this thing. And it takes any sand, any cow manure that the cows have left there to the far end. And we're going to show you when we get there how we separate, clean it back up, and reuse it. But we're mainly using gravity and sunlight. Now, with the hurricane coming through today, we're not going to have as much sunlight, and we've got a lot of rain. But also, while I'm saying that, remember all your local dairy farmers all across the Southeast are working. We go out when other people won't, when the weather's bad. So we're all here working today during the rain and still doing this podcast. But as we go through here, you can see fans at about 68 degrees. Cows really like from 40 to 60 degrees would be their optimum temperature outside. But at 68, we're going to bring these fans on. We're going to create about 6 miles an hour of wind through our barn. And then when the temperature reaches 74, right here above the cows, these are sprinkler lines. It will wet the cow in 1-minute intervals, and it will come on more often as it gets hotter. But right now they're not running, but normally they would be running this time of year and wetting the cows, and then we dry them back off with the fans. That's evaporative cooling. We're going to cool our cows down. And the cows even have cow massaging brushes throughout the barn. They use those to get a back scratch. So everything here is built for cow comfort. And you see a bunch of cows standing up right now, probably a little more than normal. They just put out the last feed for the day here. So you can see a full bunk of about 45,000 pounds of feed throughout the barn. And the cows are either over here eating, they're laying down, or they're going to and from the robots. And so normally we'd like to see about 70% laying down, 25% up eating, and cows going to and from the robots. So,
Mark, it just baffles me how quiet it is in there, right? You would think if you had 300, 400 cows in one single barn, it would be very noisy, but I think that's just a testament to how comfortable they are, right? What you said, some of them are lying down, some of them are having a meal to eat, but they're truly just relaxed. And that really is a testament just how comfortable they are and how you guys prioritize cow comfort. I get this question a lot too, and I'm sure some in the audience are curious about this. Does cow comfort translate to milk production, like increased milk production, better quality of milk?
absolutely. Happy cows really do give more milk. So, for any mammal to give milk, they have to be relaxed. They have to be comfortable. If they're scared, you get no milk. So everything we do in here, we actually try to stay out of the pens and let the cows just kind of set their own day with this voluntary milking system. And what we found out, the less we go in the pens, the more we leave them alone, the better they perform. And so that's what we want. We want these high performing athletes, which are our cows, to do stuff. And might see on some of these videos we walk by, we've got some sections that we fenced off in here that we're adding technology, even more technology right now, which are smart gates. So if a cow hasn't been to a robot in a while and walks through a smart gate, it will actually send her toward a robot. And that's going to be a really cool addition that's going to come online here, hopefully in the next couple of months. But all our cows are in here, including our dry cows, which we're fixing to walk by here in just a second. And we've got far off dry cows, which cows are pregnant for 9 months. And so the last 2 months of pregnancy, we don't milk them as they naturally want to quit producing. Well, they spend about 5 weeks in the far off dry pen, and the ration's a little different, a little more hay, a little more fiber, but we can see a couple up. But most of the time, these big girls, they're heavy pregnant. They're laying down, taking a nap, or using a cow brush, getting a body massage. And then from here, they'd spend their final 3 weeks of pregnancy in the maternity barn. So we move them to there, and we'll show you that a little bit later on one of our later stops as we do this tour.
Great. And Mark, you had mentioned, some of the new technology coming online here in the next couple of months. That falls nicely into a question we got here. Does your farm privately pay for all of these machines and technologies, or do you typically apply for grants, loans? How does that work?
Repeat that question again.
You were talking about the technology, some of the smart gates you guys are going to be installing here soon. A question came in about the financing options. Do you guys typically finance all of these technologies, by yourself, or do you rely on grants and loans?
Yeah, with the robotics course, that was a really big financial investment for my family. So we did go to Georgia Ag Credit for that one to get a little help. With the smart gates coming in and a robotic feed pusher we hopefully put in too, those are coming through what they call an SB 2 grant, I think it was. And that's to add stuff. That's a United States government grant program to add technology into farms to help them be more competitive on a global scale.
Yeah, so a little bit of both, right? There are some investments you guys will make personally, like you talked about for the next generation.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Another question here, kind of back to the robots. Can your robots detect mastitis?
Yeah, through the use of looking for conductivity. If they're off milk, the combination of that will send out indicators for us to go check the cow, and then we'll do a visual observation of the milk and decide if it's that. And that thing you hear, if you hear that bird in the background, that's actually a thing to scare birds out of our barn. There's some balls hanging down and some other stuff you may see on the videos, but those are all to try to keep birds out. Migratory birds can bring disease, so we don't want them in our barn.
Mackenzie, was there anything else you guys wanted to talk about here? Or should we move on to the next stop?
I think we can move on.
Okay, great. So while Mark is making his way through the freestall barn, let's see if you all were listening. So we're going to have a Zoom poll. The cows at Hillcrest Farms enjoy the same sand in their freestall barns that is also used at which major sporting event? So while we're waiting for some answers to come in, I've learned sand is the gold standard for bedding in the Southeast. So Mark, can you share quickly why you use sand and how does that help with cow comfort and cleanliness?
Sure. I'm out here at actually I walked by the sign. It's the locally sourced, sustainable, all natural sand and organic nutrient reclamation area. Hopefully one of these girls will catch a picture of that sign right there. It's a real fancy way of every word you ever look for in a grocery store applies to what we do here. And we're trying to utilize this manure back onto the fields. And so it cuts down on our carbon footprint because we don't need as much commercial fertilizer, and especially nitrogen. They use a lot of natural gas to make nitrogen. So I'm out here at our sustainable area, and you can see sand stacked up here. And usually it's really white. Today, because of the hurricane, I'm standing out here in a little bit of rain right now. The sand looks a little bit darker, but we actually stack a small stack every day that we get out of these alleys out here. And remember earlier we said we chilled the milk by running water in that plate cooler. Well, actually, we don't want to waste that water, so we put it in a third water tank. And that's our fresh water that we flush down through here to clean all the manure out. And it takes the manure and the water on down into one of two cells you can see down below me right here. And from there, that's basically a giant colander. And so the manure stays in, the water drains out, it drains into one pond, and it drains into the final pond. And from there, the only moving part, the only thing using energy at all is that final pump that pumps it back up to the two original water towers. Now, if we're gaining water, like this time of year, we may want to irrigate some of that water on cropland, and that helps cut down on commercial fertilizer too. And if you look down at the sails, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but those are ibis lined up around. They kind of actually love this area. These ponds are just full of ducks this time of year. So we provide a lot of wildlife space here too. So we're doing a lot of really cool stuff. But the sand, just by rolling it over with big payloaders and stuff, and we're using the ultraviolet light of the sun to clean this sand up and to keep it clean. And we're going to clean it for about 2 months. And about every 2 weeks, we're going to put some sand back in the barn to replace whatever a cow has kicked out. So it's a really good system. And it actually got more efficient with time because you tend to reclaim the sand. It's a little bit coarser, what you want in those beds. And so as time has went on, we're probably reclaiming about 96, 97% of the sand.
Wow, I'm sure your cows love you for those comfy sand beds. For those of you who are just dying to know the answer, and the answer was, let's see, the Augusta National for the Masters Golf Tournament. So that was the answer. Back to you, Mackenzie and Mark, to talk about, to cover anything else we need to cover here.
Yeah, so Mark, I guess let's just talk a little bit more about that manure management system, right? Do you follow a nutrient management plan? Once that, you talked about the flush system a little bit, right? That 4 inches of water is running through your barns multiple times a day, and it's pushing that manure and sand to the bottom, and you walk through that process of how the sand is filtered out. But tell us about the manure. Where does all that go?
Yeah, well, you can actually see if some of the videos are on it right now, it is flushing and it come on automatically. So Audrey got cut on the far end with her camera. But it flushes down, the water travels to the end. You can see it pouring in the pit down here. Everything works really, really good. We actually will dry that pit down to a real thick consistency, and then we apply it to cropland based on a conservation nutrient management plan that we get a lot of help from NRCS with this kind of stuff. NRCS actually helped me design all this area out here. So we get a lot of assistance on that, and we use engineers in the Southeast to also help us. So between the engineers within RCS and those, we came up with a really good plan that makes all this stuff function with basically gravity and sunlight. I mean, so it's an amazing thing to do. And like I said, we put out what we're supposed to. We don't over apply, and we do keep those riparian buffers between us and any waterways.
It's just wild to me that the design and the engineering of what you're talking about, Mark, the barn, the lagoons, the system, that has so much to do with the efficiency of your operation. And like you said, things running on gravity rather than pumps, you're saving energy, you're saving time and all of that. I think that's just really impressive. So you're using the manure as, again, a natural source of fertilizer for your cropland. How much of your cropland are you utilizing as feed for your cows?
How much land? Well, we use it. We don't sell any manure at all. We're using it all on all our cropland. We've got about 55 acres in the back that we can actually irrigate, but the rest of it's took out in this more solid form, and we put it on all the cropland. We have put some on some hayland even, but usually it's more corn, sorghum, and ryegrass are the main 3 crops we grow.
And are you primarily growing all your forages that you're feeding your animals?
We do. About 52% of the feed every day we grow here on the farm. And the main thing is corn, and we turn it into corn silage. We also use sorghum, which we just harvested before the hurricane hit last night and got it covered up. So we were so grateful to get that done before this. And we do ryegrass. We plant it in the fall and harvest it in the spring. And we can actually get 2 cuttings of ryegrass. So the field up here on top of the hill can actually grow 4 crops in a year. So it's pretty amazing what you can do with that. And that's more of a regional thing. Some, states further north can't grow stuff in the winter like we can down here. So we can grow stuff year round. It's an amazing thing that, maybe gives the Southeast a little edge on those kind of things.
Sure. And that continuous cropping really just helps with your carbon sequestration too, right? If you constantly have something in those fields.
Right. And we do strip till. So we're doing a lot of conservation tillage out there in those fields to, let the earthworms get back out there and do some of the tillage for us by not turning it over all the time. So we're leaving that like right now, that sorghum and stuff is still on top of the fields, and we'll plant the ryegrass directly into that. So we've got a barrier against erosion.
Mhm.
I always love to hear about, I just think it's so cool to think you're not just a dairy farmer, you're a crop farmer. I mean, you guys are doing so many different things. And I did want to just back up just a minute. We were showing some videos earlier of just some of those feeds. So obviously what you're growing, but then also what you're bringing in. And I'm not sure we highlighted enough about how a lot of what you're feeding is actually byproducts of other industries. So, thinking that up to 1/3 of a dairy cow's diet on some farms comes from byproducts like almond hulls or distillers grains, or it just depends where you're at regionally, what that might be. But that helps to reduce food waste and methane emissions in landfills. So it's really cool to think dairy cows can take foods and nutrients that humans can't use and then turn it into a product like milk that has 13 essential nutrients, including 8 grams of high quality protein. So I think we're now at the calves. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening here?
Yeah. As you see in the video, most of them right now are napping. They got fed early this morning. Our calf manager came in, fed everything, checked on them. And when we move the calf in here, the great thing is we can monitor how much feed they eat, how much water they drink, how much milk we give them, and we can increase the milk as they age so we can grow them as rapidly as possible. On our farm, we generally have one heifer or replacement calf for every mature cow on the farm. So they're kind of an expense. I mean, they're not making any money till they start milking. And so we want to raise them as fast as possible to get them up to that 2-year-old age when they will start milking. And so we shoot for 2 years old, but they're in this barn, so they get a really good start. And they are separated by these little panels, but they're right beside each other. And then we actually move them from here about day 60 into a little group that they can kind of hang out with about 4 or 5 others the same age and learn to eat as a group. And then from there, close to day 100, we're going to move them out on pasture. And by there, they're starting to eat a little grass, a little hay, and it gives them that nice, smooth transition throughout their lives. This is actually a barn we repurposed. This was an old holding pen for the old dairy that we milked in prior to robots, and we repurposed it. We added some variable speed fans in here, and the fans even come on at 55 degrees. They come on a lot colder on the calves, but that's important. Those calves really need that nice, fresh, clean air. And so they just barely run at 55 degrees and keep air moving through this barn all the time. And we clean the sand out here. We use the same sand we use for the cows, except this is not recycled sand. We put brand new sand in here every time, and we'll clean them out between calves. Because sand is inorganic and it's a good medium to raise a calf on. And you can see where they're getting off the concrete, go back into the sand and lay down. They really, really like that.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you went through the life stage too of that early calf, because it just helps you give a vision of how they, get older and then how they go to pasture and then they start working. How long, someone's asking, how long can you keep milking a cow? I always think this is an interesting conversation. And then do you keep all of your calves?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here at Hillcrest, we keep all the female calves. Of course, to give milk, you got to be a female and you got to be a mammal. So those two things, the cows check them off really well. All the male calves are sold. We don't keep any males. And we do a lot of AI here, and I do some artificial intelligence stuff. But when we say AI, we're talking about artificial insemination, and that gives us access to a lot better genetics. We haven't actually purchased an animal since like 1972. This is what they call a closed herd, and those have become real rare, that we don't bring in any outside animals. It also helps prevent disease by bringing cattle in from other farms. So we raise our own stuff, and we do sell some young stock, some heifers to other dairies. So we don't necessarily, we can handle here about 62 cows per the robot. Seems to work really well for us at the current time. So we think of it like baseball teams. So that 62, there may be an older cow that's still really performing well. Well, we keep that older cow, and we may sell a younger cow. And then there are times we replace the older cow with a younger cow, just because the younger cow probably has better genetics than the older one. We have a cow currently milking that has had 8 calves. So she's had 8 lactations. That cow's about 11, 12 years old. So it shows, and there's less stress with robots. So we really look for them to live and perform longer in a robotic dairy than a traditional dairy.
So that is all super interesting information about, I love that baseball team kind of, idea that you gave. Can you share, just to clarify for everyone, how many calves one cow has a year?
Cows normally have one calf each. I think here about every 20th, 20 to 25th birth will be twins. We don't really want twins. It's like any mom. It's harder than having a single calf. But you will have a few sets of twins. In my lifetime, I've had 2 sets of triplets here on the farm. And I can vividly remember that. And I think the odds of that are like 1 in 13,000. They're pretty high. So twins are real rare, but most of them will be single births. And we watch them. And we're going to cover that when we get to the maternity pen, what all we do to watch that cow.
That's right. So Mark is going to make his way to the maternity barn. And while he does that, I want to help provide some more insight around how dairy fits into sustainable diet with some other concepts there. So we know that there's plenty of suggestions out there on how we can eat to support the environment, including reducing or even totally eliminating animal-based products like dairy. And researchers at Virginia Tech actually put this theory to test with a modeling study, and their findings might surprise you. So we're going to share a quick little video here to help provide some insight.
Here's a crazy idea. What would happen if America's farmers and dairy cows went on vacation? All milk production comes to a halt. So no more cheesy pizza, creamy yogurt, or power smoothies. Of course, we'd miss our favorite dairy foods. But what would happen to all the nutrition dairy provides? Or to the environment? Well, a group of scientists went beyond guessing. Their extensive research came up with some surprising discoveries. Let's start with nutrition. Milk packs a healthy punch, containing 13 essential nutrients that benefit health and wellness. Americans get over half of their calcium and vitamin D from milk, cheese, and yogurt, plus over a quarter of the vitamin B12 that's consumed in the US. For many, dairy is an affordable choice of nutrition that's not easily replaced by other food sources. That's echoed by Dr. Robin White. She studied the impact of having land now used for dairy cows be repurposed to grow other foods.
So when land used for feed for dairy cattle was replaced with fruits and vegetables or nuts and beans, we saw a 57% reduction in the availability of vitamin B12 and a 54% reduction in the availability of vitamin D. So then for calcium, we saw about a 12% and a 28% reduction respectively.
That means less essential nutrients if dairy land is used to grow other crops. But what about the environment? Cows emit methane, a greenhouse gas. With cows out of the picture, how does that impact climate change? Today, dairy cows comprise only about 1.3% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. That's a small sliver compared to emissions from other sectors.
Because dairy cattle only contribute a proportion of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, and agricultural greenhouse gas emissions are only about 9% of total emissions in the US. If we were to eliminate dairy cattle from the US food production system and replace them with other agricultural processes, we estimate the equivalent reduction in total US greenhouse gas emissions to be less than 1%.
But the dairy industry knows that its emissions, while small, can still have an impact. That's why it's working to be more sustainable by reducing food waste, improving water quality, and advancing farm practices and technologies. And it's committed to becoming carbon neutral or better by 2050. From dairy products to fruits and vegetables to nuts and beans, a well-stocked fridge has lots of options. And cutting down our carbon footprint doesn't have just one answer.
You know, there isn't one magical solution to improving greenhouse gas emissions, but what that means is that all of our industries have the opportunity to be part of the solution. And that's part of why the dairy industry is moving toward a carbon neutral strategy.
Seeing that dairy is good for you and is working harder for the planet, it's a good thing that cows are home.
So I love that video. I think it does a good job of just having that conversation about just thinking about what does that impact mean. And that video is created in partnership with the Explainer Studio and National Dairy Council. So I'm grateful to have that to help, facilitate this conversation. That study they talked about there was a modeling study, but it isn't the only study that's looking at what might happen if we eliminated dairy foods. So there was another 2020 modeling study published in the Journal of Public Health Nutrition that showed what would happen if all dairy's nutrients were replaced by other foods. And what they found that, yeah, it's possible. You can find dairy's nutrients in other foods, but there would be a considerable increase in cost, energy intake, and food volume to match what dairy provides. So I think, these are both just modeling studies, but I think they're just a great conversation starter to think about this idea of what does a sustainable diet mean and what do we need to think about? And just show that environmental impact should be considered in the context of nutritional provision. And before we move back to the farm, even the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations is considering this topic. They were someone that I really used as a resource when I started learning about sustainable diet, because they've got a great definition, just kind of talking about everything that might go into this a sustainable diet. And they noted that animal foods contribute crucial nutrients, particularly during pregnancy, lactation, childhood, adolescence, and older age. So we're going to get back to the farm now with Mark, now that we've set some interesting thoughts, hopefully, in your head. And Mark, can you tell us about this area and what these girls are waiting for?
Right. This is my favorite part of the barn. This is the maternity barn. So you can see a newborn. He was born just a few hours ago. And this is his mom. And you were asking me earlier, I think this cow's had about 6 babies. So she really has been a good cow for us. And the blue paint on her, if somebody happens to ask you, what is that, 25? Well, that's the date she gave birth, or the day before. But anyway, they write the number on there just to kind of track the cow and watch that cow, really give her some special attention for the next couple of days, just like any new mom. But this calf's here. It gives them a good start. And then in this pen, we can also, if she needed assistance, we've got cameras watching her. We can watch her from the couch at home give birth. If she needed any assistance whatsoever, we could be here in just a few minutes and help her with that. The cows next to me over here are also in this barn. There's about 20 head in here. This is our maternity cows. Well, these are the cows all within 21 days of calving. We could have one calving in the next 2 minutes, up to 21 days from now, but they're on our most special diet. Just like any mom needs prenatal vitamins and stuff, we're going to feed them this diet to prepare them for calving, to have them in the best shape we can get them into. And we do some things different here. We feed a little different here, but everything is about care for that new mom and that new calf.
And we're getting a couple questions about this. One is, how long will the calf stay with the mom? And then, can you control the gender of the calves through genetics?
There is sex semen available. We're using just a little bit of it. You tend to have more female calves. That is one option if you need more. With this, what was the other part of the question?
Can you control the gender? And then, how long will the calf stay with the mom?
Oh, okay. That calf, it depends on what time of day they calve. So if they calve early in the morning, probably by tonight, we're going to actually take this calf to the nursery where we can start monitoring its intakes better. Because if it's with the mom, I don't know how much it's drinking, but we're going to make sure it gets plenty of good colostrum. That's the first milk that the cow gives. It's called colostrum. It's kind of nature's secret. It's a miracle thing. It passes on any cold she's ever seen, any vaccine the cow's ever had. She passes that immunity knowledge onto that calf by that colostrum. So that's the most critical thing we do for every newborn calf. But from there, when the calf's up doing really well, the cow's up really doing good, we actually take the cow to what we call our rest and recovery barn. We actually take her through the old dairy, and we're going to actually capture her colostrum to feed to the next calf born. But we're going to lab test it, make sure it's of the highest quality. If it's not, we may add some powdered colostrum to it, but we can feed this to our calves to give them that great start. And then from there, the calf needs to go to the nursery so we can start monitoring how much it's drinking. Is it drinking adequate amounts? And immediately we have a little bit of feed out. It might not eat much, but it's there, it's available, and clean water. So all these things we can monitor better. So, about 12 to 24 hours, this calf's going to be in the nursery.
That's great. Mackenzie, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, we definitely want to leave a couple minutes here for questions. So, Mark, if you want to go ahead and head to the top of the freestyle for Q&A, I just really want to thank you for having us out today and opening your farm up, especially during a hurricane. I think you mentioned that earlier, right? We started planning for this tour long ago, not knowing there would be a hurricane hitting us, but farmers truly never stop working. So it's just another day for you guys. It's truly been a privilege of mine, and I know Callie's, to introduce all of you to Hillcrest Farms, and all the incredible work being done here. And thank you again, Mark, for sharing your time and expertise today. In our few minutes, we will open it up for questions. So y'all, please drop those in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah,
And then
you want me to share? Right here is where I really like to wrap up our tours, is at the top end of this maternity pen. They've got fresh water here. We tip it out multiple times a day, so they've always got good cold water. They've got feed in front of them right here, 24/7. They always have access to feed. We're never going to let them run out. We're going to put fresh feed, clean up anything that's left. We're not going to waste it. We're going to feed it to a heifer group, but we're going to take and put out new feed every morning. And right here, you can really see the sand they're laying on. You can see the fans running. You can see the sprinklers over here if it was hot enough for them to come on. And this pen is the one that we're flushing that fresh water through. So I need to know where that newborn baby's at. He's out of the way. So we can actually flush this barn right here and show you how easy it is to clean and recycle all the water, all the manure. We're going to recycle all the sand. And we're using gravity. We're using sunlight that don't fail. And the only moving part is the pump at the end. So, like I said, and this is reusing. We're creating about 2 gallons of fresh water for every gallon of milk that we're chilling down. So, during the day, we probably gain about 6,000 gallons of water. And this is where we use it to clean everything up. This is the final flush of the day when we do this one.
That's awesome, Mark. A couple questions coming in here. Do you happen to know how much energy your voluntary milking system uses annually? Or maybe are you seeing less energy from that system than you were from your previous milking system?
Power bill went down just a little bit. So I haven't actually crunched the numbers on the kilowatts and all that stuff, but I think it's a little bit more efficient system the way we're doing now.
Great. And then you had mentioned NRCS is a great technical resource for you guys and one you've leaned on heavily. Are there any other teams of technical experts you use to help you make some of these best management decisions, implementing some of these sustainable technologies?
Absolutely. We use a lot of private resources. One, we've got a nutritionist that helps us that does multiple dairies across the Southeast as a key component to making these decisions on how we feed and what we need to feed. We use like I said, engineers, not only within RCS, but we hired engineers to help us design all this. We're not smart enough to do this. And even one thing I didn't cover, we even capture the roof water off all these buildings, and we can recycle it. If we need the additional water, we can add it to the system. If we don't need it, we can exit it out across a pasture with just clean water. But we're not going to waste a single drop of water on this farm. So we get a lot of technical assistance with that. So yeah, we get some outside help, and with mating, I don't do any of the genetics. We actually have an independent guy that works for a company that helps us mate our cows, decide what are the best options to breed them to maximize genetics.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that's something people probably don't realize quite as much is just all the trusted advisors you guys lean on, right? In my opinion, and you're only as good as the people around you. So it's great to have those people around you. Good question here. Have you guys started selling carbon credits, or would you like to one day?
Absolutely. I would love to sell carbon credits to somebody else. I think that's a cool option for dairymen as another stream of revenue. I would love for the bottlers to pay for a more sustainable product and go, hey, you know what? We're going to put it on the label, but you deserve some extra money for doing all this work and for really doing the great job. It's nice to be reimbursed for some of that. So I look forward to maybe some bottlers doing that at some point.
Great. Let's see. if there was one, this is obviously a fantastic, all the comments are saying that, Mark, of how great you're doing, and just really exciting to see, the aggregate of practice you guys have to be that carbon neutral. I think it's important to note that, sometimes we hear the flashy things in dairy as far as anaerobic digesters, and I think it said within the video, right? Sustainability is not a silver bullet. For small to mid-sized dairies, there are an opportunity for an aggregate of practices to help reduce your carbon emissions and make you guys more efficient. So if there was one thing you wanted people to take away from this tour, what would it be?
Well, I think people need to understand. People that tour here are amazed at the technology, but two, at the sheer amount of attention that my staff pays. My daughter, my niece is the veterinarian, and the staff really do a great job, all the way from the feed guy to the robot technicians. It's a team effort to do what we do. I couldn't do it by myself. There's no way. I don't have enough hours in the day. So, seeing all these young people working here, seeing how much everybody contributes and works together to just make that gallon of milk that you enjoy in that store, I think people leave here with a great appreciation of what goes into that milk by the time they leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely.
I love, Mackenzie, how you brought that up. I know before I had visited Mark's farm, I working for dairy farmers, kind of had this misconception that, we needed these methane digesters to get to a certain point in terms of sustainability. And I just love to see this great example of all the little things and the big things with the robotic milkers that y'all do. Just, it all adds up. And so I hope that leaves people with just feeling hopeful about the work that our farmers are doing to make sure that they're farming sustainably as well.
Yeah, just one other question coming in here. Obviously, we're seeing all the great practices that you're doing, Mark. Is this, are these practices unique to Hillcrest, unique to Georgia, or are they pretty widespread across the U.S.?
Oh, a lot of these practices are used all across the U.S. It doesn't matter the size or the scale of the farm, from the little bitty, farm with just a few animals, all the way to the largest farm. They're all working to protect the environment. And all these farms are pretty well family farms. They're working together. They're protecting the water. Farms of all sizes, all shapes. I mean, we may do a little different than a farmer in Wisconsin, just because they have to deal with severe cold we never see. But we deal with the heat extreme. So our barn has open ridges and things that were designed for hot weather, where they may build things a little more for cold weather. So those minor differences, but we all, no matter where you're at in the United States, all take great care of our cows.
Mm-hmm. Someone's asking where we didn't talk about this, but where can we buy your milk? But then they're asking, how can we support our local dairy farmer? So do you have anything to share about that?
Yeah, there's some great local farms that have small creameries on their own. We do not. We're actually selling a truckload at a time of the raw product. And so all we do is cool it, filter it, put it on truck. And actually, we're kind of an odd duck. They actually take some milk from here all the way back. Currently, it's going to Louisiana. So if you wanted to drink my milk, you'd probably have to get up early and go to the store in New Orleans or Baton Rouge or somewhere to get that milk. But the co-ops, the marketing agencies we sell our milk through, make sure that all regions of the country have milk available. So, they could decide tomorrow to send my milk to South Carolina or keep it in Georgia, but that's up to the cooperative.
And oftentimes, right, Mackenzie, milk is fairly local in terms of where you're purchasing it, where it's being produced.
I was just going to say, Mark's a little bit of an anomaly there. Typically, the milk you're getting in your grocery store is being sourced within 100 miles of your location. So really, to support your local dairy farm, the best way is to just go to your local grocery store and pick up that gallon of milk. And I think Mark would tell you, hop on that red cap, because that's the good stuff.
Absolutely. That's one of my key things. If you're going to eat pork chops and bacon that are probably 50% fat, don't worry, is your milk 97% fat-free or 98% fat-free? Drink the whole milk. Get the good stuff. I know I use it in my weightlifting program, and a lot of athletes I talk to do. It's a great rehydration product. And, get the whole benefit of the whole thing. You're paying for it, so let's drink that whole milk.
Awesome. Yeah, we won't get Mark on his soapbox. We're at time here. Thank you again, Mark. We really appreciate it. We hope today has helped provide some insight on how dairy can be part of a sustainable diet for all of our attendees. We also hope you leave here with a deeper appreciation and understanding of how milk is made from farm to fridge, what we just discussed, and the dedication dairy farmers make to environmental stewardship and animal care.
So before we go, we would love to hear from you. So please, please take a minute to just answer this survey that we have. There's a QR code on the screen. We've also dropped a link in the chat box, I believe. If not, just use the QR code. So please take that. This is very helpful to us. And this survey will also be provided in the follow-up email you will get. If you complete it now, please only complete it once. And just don't forget that the Dairy Alliance is your resource for all things dairy. If you're a health professional here, and obviously we didn't talk about everything you can talk about during nutrition, but if you're wondering, whether it's inflammation or heart disease or diabetes, we have science summaries on all those topics, and I invite you to look at those, look at the research, and reach out to myself if you have any questions about that. And great recipes on there as well. So, and then just a gentle reminder that, often we get a lot of questions. This farm is great, but are all farms like that? We got a couple of those kind of at the end. And if you're curious what other farms look like, again, you can go to our website. We've got lots of past virtual farm tours, and you can learn about other farms in the Southeast and how maybe what they do is a little bit the same and a little bit different. So thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you again, Mark. We wish you a dairy good day. This is all for now.